Hello. My name is Nektaria Stamouli, and I'm Politico's Eastern Mediterranean correspondent based in Athens. I would like to thank Cyprus Forum for bringing us together for this very timely topic. We're going to discuss migration on this panel. Migration is once again on top of the political agenda, not only and social agenda, not only in Cyprus but also in Europe these days. For example, today the leaders of the Mediterranean countries, the Med9, are meeting in Malta, and migration is on top of the agenda amid growing tensions regarding the issue in Europe. I'm terribly sorry I could not attend in person because I would love to be there with all of you. But due to everything that's happening in Greece, I had to do this online. But we will find a way to make this work. For this panel discussion, I have the honor to have a panel of distinguished guests. We have together with us Andrew Peter Geddes, who is Professor of Migration Studies and Director at the Migration Policy Center. We have Anke Schlimm, who is the Ambassador of the Federal Republic of Germany to Cyprus. Salina Grenet-Catalano, Ambassador of France to Cyprus. Iasmi Valianatou, Academy Associate at the Europe Program of Chatham House, and Corina Drousiotou, Coordinator and Senior Legal Advisor at Cyprus Refugee Council, and Katja, Saha, UNHCR representative in Cyprus. So before moving ahead with the panel discussion, I would like to ask Joyce Ibrahim from the World Bank to present us the World Development Report for 2023, which proposes an approach to maximize the development impacts of cross-border movements on both destination and origin countries, and on migrants and refugees themselves. Joyce, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Nektaria. Just giving a minute until the PowerPoint's up.
Yeah.
Actually, and while they're getting it up. So first of all, thanks to the Cyprus Forum for inviting me. I'm Joyce Ibrahim. I manage the World Development Report that came out earlier this year on migrants, refugees, and societies. We were very excited. The World Bank was willing to take up this topic. As some of you may know, it's the flagship report, the World Development Report, that comes out every year, and it's usually on a different topic relevant to development. So this is the first time it's addressing migration. So I'll just briefly go over the findings. It's a huge report. It's available online, and I'm sorry I have to cover it all in 15 minutes, so there's a lot I won't be able to cover, but I'll just give you an overview and then turn it to our panelists who can actually speak about how these topics are relevant to Cyprus and the EU. So what's this report about? So it's about the 184 million migrants and refugees worldwide. Now, the number might look a bit different. I think if you've seen other numbers out there by the UN, IOM, they're about 100 million more, about 280 million. And the difference is we are looking at people that are foreign nationals, not foreign born. Because to us, the fact that you don't have citizenship is exactly why we think migrants face challenges, and don't have the same rights as citizens. If once you're a naturalized citizen, you're a citizen. So to us, you're no longer a migrant. And if you look at the pie chart, so about 80% of these 184 million are economic migrants and 20% are refugees. And the key figure here that I want to point to is the 43%. So about half of these people actually live in low and middle income countries. I think, again, there's a bit of a stereotype that people are moving from the south to the north, that people are going from lower income to higher income countries. That's actually not the case. Many migrants are actually moving to neighboring countries that are low and middle income countries. And maybe the other surprising thing, most people think of countries as either countries of origin, so countries that send migrants, or countries of destination that receive migrants, and this dichotomy. And we're seeing an increasing number of countries that actually are both origin and destination. In the UK, there are actually more UK citizens living outside the UK than foreign nationals inside the UK. So, and other countries, Nigeria and Turkey we have here, but there's many others that actually receive as many migrants as they send abroad. So one of the main kind of points of this report is the demographic trends we're seeing today are going to make migration increasingly necessary. I think we're all familiar with how fast high-income countries, particularly in the EU, are aging and how fast their fertility rates are declining. By the end of the century, if Italy does not allow any migrants in, its population will be cut in half. Spain's will be cut by a third. In Korea, 1 out of 6 people will be over 85 by 2050, so in our lifetime. And so, we've seen some EU countries trying to adopt natalist policies. Others have tried to do pension reform. Countries like Japan are trying to rely on automation. What we say is you can add all those up, and it is still not enough to maintain the economies and to continue their pension systems. But I think what was most surprising to many of us in this report is actually how fast middle-income countries are also aging, and how fast, again, their fertility rates are declining. So just throw out a few countries: Mexico, Turkey, Tunisia, Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, all today already are below the fertility rate of 2.1, which is the fertility rate countries need to maintain their population. So today, a lot of these countries are already having fewer children than they need. So these are countries that have always sent migrants abroad, and I don't think many of them are ready for the reality that they'll also need to receive migrants. So it's really only, and sorry, this is a bit cut off, but it's really only the low-income countries that still have booming birth rates. And the question is, do these youth have the skills that will be needed in the global labor market? And I think until now their answer is no. So with that in mind, what the report has done is, we're not questioning whether migration is good or bad. We're being very practical. It's necessary. All countries at all income levels will need it. So we're asking the question, how can it be better managed? And so we've come up with what we call a framework called the match and motive matrix to try to help countries assess different policies for different types of movements. So what do we mean by match? Match is looking at how well migrants' skills match the needs of their labor market. So this is kind of the economist view on migration. Do migrants, are they a benefit to society, or are they a cost? It's a cost-benefit analysis. And then we've tried to look at both perspectives, so from the economics, but also international law. So what's the motive behind why people are moving? Is it out of fear for their life, or is it purely voluntary for better economic opportunities? So what we've done is we've overlaid these two, hence the match and motive matrix, and so you come up with actually 4 different types of movement. So again, one of the main messages we're looking at is not all migrants are the same, and different types of movements need to call for different policy responses from countries. So the little stick figures you see in the matrix are proportional to the number worldwide. So it's very clear up front that most people, contrary to what the media will have you think, are economic migrants that do bring skills that are in need in the labor market. And so here really the policy space for countries is how do you maximize the gains and further reduce the costs. There are costs. Even when we look at benefits here, we're looking at the net benefits. There are always costs to migrants, whether it's using public services, the cost of integration, et cetera. So we're looking at whether they bring net benefits. And if you look at the top right, these are refugees. So they are in need of international protection. They cannot be sent back to their country of origin, but they happen to actually bring skills that are in demand in the country they move to. I think we all know refugees aren't thinking of the labor market when they're moving. They're fearing for their life, so most will move to any country where they can seek safety. But in some of these cases, it just so happens they may bring skills that are in demand. The poster child, of course, is Einstein in the US, but think today of a Venezuelan doctor moving to Colombia, a Syrian entrepreneur opening up a business in Germany. So here, very similar policy space, how can these countries just maximize the benefits of the labor contributions? It gets a little more complicated under the 2 quadrants under the horizontal line. So for the bottom right quadrant, this is where most refugees lie. 40% of refugees are children. They cannot work, and many other refugees, as I said, they're moving for their life, so they happen to not have skills that are in demand in the countries they move to. But of course, they cannot be sent back by international law. So here it's about how do we adopt more sustainable policies in the long term and have the international community share the cost of hosting them, and I'll get into that in a bit in a later slide. And then perhaps the most complicated and the one that is probably most often covered by the media are what we call distressed migrants. So, think of the migrants crossing on the boats, the Mediterranean to reach the EU, the migrants from Central America crossing to the US. We all know these are very, in many cases, very dangerous journeys, mainly irregular journeys, but they don't necessarily qualify as refugees. Whoops. And so here, we're trying to think about how do you reduce the need for such movements. This is about long-term development, or how do countries think about ways that they can either absorb or return them humanely, if needed. So let me just go a bit more into some of the policies. So again, we tried to take these 4 types of movements and give policy recommendations both to countries of origin and countries of destination, and transit countries as well, which I think is relevant to the EU, but again, in the interest of time, I won't be able to go through those in the presentation. So for countries of origin, when migrants do bring skills that are in need at the destination country, what we try to say in the report is countries of origin need to take a more active role. I think many have been passive. They just happen to reap the benefits of migration through remittances and other things, but very few of them have actually managed migration to their advantage. One of the countries that has done it very well is the Philippines. So, they can facilitate remittances, they can reduce the cost of remittances, facilitate.
Which country was it?
The Philippines.
Philippines.
Facilitate knowledge transfers. They can build skills that are in demand globally, which is what the Philippines has done. They understand that nurses are in high demand. They train them in the Philippines before they go, and the Philippines also benefits. For every nurse that goes abroad, 9 actually do stay in the Philippines. So they're able to mitigate brain drain in that way as well, and protect nationals while abroad, especially those that end up in quite exploitative working conditions. And then for destination countries, probably more relevant to EU countries, so it's about giving rights and full access to the labor market, facilitating the inclusion of migrants, and here we're talking about social inclusion as well, not just economic inclusion, and very, again, consciously trying to attract migrants that have the skills that are in demand. We know many EU countries now do have a labor shortage in many areas, both low-skilled and high-skilled. So it's about how can you actively put policies in place that attract the types of migrants that you do need, and supporting nationals that may be affected, which is a reality in some cases. Then again, more complicated policies when it gets to when the match is weaker. So for refugees, here, what we're saying is, if you take the Ukraine crisis aside, the statistic now is the average refugee lives in exile for 13 years. So that is no longer a humanitarian situation. We have to address refugee situations more as long-term development challenges. They do not go home very, very quickly. And so here you see the red arrows. It's how can you actually move the refugees up to that upper quadrant so that they actually are able to contribute to the labor market. It's a win-win situation because it also reduces the cost for host countries of hosting them as well when you allow refugees to be self-reliant. And here it's about 3 different policies that we're talking about. One is what we call internal mobility. I think UNHCR calls it freedom of movement. Essentially, do not confine refugees to camps. Let them move within a country. And again, it's a win-win situation. When you confine them to camps, it's often at the border. It places quite a burden on the host communities because again, you're not letting them disperse and they take up a lot of resources. Second, allowing them to work. So again, let them move to areas where there are jobs, give them work permits, et cetera. And the last thing is including them in national systems. And here, most importantly, education for the children, so they're not out of school for a while, but also including them in health systems, social services, et cetera. And I think we'll hear more from UNHCR in a bit in the panel. And then again, the most complicated one is how do you deal with distressed migration? It is a reality, and we don't see that it's going to decrease anytime soon. So, for countries of origin, this is of course more of a long-term goal, but how do you work on development in the country of origin? Skilling your people, giving them more opportunities so that if they choose to migrate, it's not under these life-threatening journeys. And if they do choose to migrate, that they actually have skills that they can are in demand in the countries they move to. And for the countries of destination, so it's twofold. One is about some of these migrants actually do have skills that the countries move to. I can tell you in the US, there's quite a bit of demand in the construction industry, in the cleaning industry, in the restaurant industry. Most of these jobs are filled by undocumented workers, and the US is very happy about it. Americans will not take these jobs. But they're coming undocumented because the US is not opening up legal pathways for many of them. So there's plenty of legal pathways for higher skilled workers, but there's very few for lower skilled, even though some of these skills are in demand. So we're saying at least in those where those skills are in demand, allowing, opening up legal pathways so that they're not having to come in undocumented, and then again dealing with returns in a humane way. And then, what do we mean by extending complementary modes of protection? So, as many of us know in this room, it's not very clear cut on you're either a refugee or you're moving voluntarily. There's quite a bit in between. Again, someone perhaps fleeing gang violence in Central America may not qualify as a refugee, but they actually are fearing for their life. So we've seen, the EU and the US and some other countries giving temporary protected status for certain cases. But what we're saying here is, they tend to be ad hoc. They're not always predictable. Sometimes they're for very defined periods of time. So how can you extend those complementary modes of protection in a more predictable way? So with that, again, we're trying to, just conclude with migration has not been managed very well, and we're trying to look at, again, how can you manage it better? And to us, it's really about we have to redefine how policies have been made, both bilaterally and multilaterally. So I think there needs to be more strategic bilateral cooperation, again, very targeted between countries on the skills that are needed through global skills partnerships, and other avenues, bilateral labor agreements. Multilaterally, it's mostly targeted, of course, towards the international community's responsibility to host refugees. I should mention 90% of refugees are hosted in only 12 countries. So, again, there's quite a bit of burden, and again, many of them lower and middle income countries. So there's quite a bit of burden falling on very few countries, although most countries have signed the Geneva Convention. So here it's about, again, how can you work together? How can you put more funding that's shared across the community? And then we are the World Bank, so of course we have to talk about financing instruments. So how can you get more creative for financing instruments that help non-citizens? Because currently at the World Bank, of course, when you lend loans to governments, they're very naturally going to prioritize their own citizens, and perfectly understandable why. So how can you offer maybe extra incentives for the non-citizens in their country that are more medium term? It's okay, don't worry about it. And then the last thing is, how do you increase the voice of those that have been underrepresented? So, whether it's low middle income countries, and oftentimes migrants and refugees themselves that are, represented perhaps by other parties that may not have their best interest at stake. So with that, I'll just leave you with the 4 main key messages of the report. I'm sorry, again, I know I covered a lot, and there's a lot more specifics, but it is available online. There's also a very short overview for those that don't want to look at the full report. So thank you very much, and I'll look forward to hearing from the panelists on, again, the Cyprus EU context more specifically.
Thank you very much, Joyce, for this presentation. I think it clears many misperceptions and gives some very interesting recommendations and clear ones. And I would say it puts a positive side on this agenda that always causes fractions and The debate is not on the positive side, usually, on a political level. Now, moving on to our panel discussion, I'd like to start with Andrew. Andrew, you have been studying migration patterns for quite some time, and the Migration Policy Center aims to inform major European.
So I'll keep it quite short because I think we've got some great contributions to come. We've heard some very interesting insights, and I'm sure people in the audience would want to say something. So I'm the director of something called the Migration Policy Center of the European University Institute in Florence. And we look at migration policy globally. We also look at attitudes to migration, public attitudes to migration. I'm particularly interested in the politics and policy of migration. So perhaps building on what Joyce was saying, just some observations really about the European context, which I think could be quite relevant in terms of the characteristics of policies in European countries, speaking quite broadly, but looking at general trends, and also trends in public attitudes to migration, because I think it's crucial to think about how public support can be built for migration policy. And then really then thinking also about this, well, helping to really contextualize this issue of the demographic transition, because there is significant demographic change, but the resolution of that is a fundamentally political question. And so I think it's important to look at the politics and the policy of migration. So really just a number of observations to start with. If we look at the period since the Second World War, across Europe, migration policy in Europe have become more open, not less open, more open. If you look across the main categories of migration, economic, family, students, and also protection, you see trends towards openness in European migration policies since the Second World War. Very well documented and a very important trend. A second element across European countries since the Second World War is access to rights. There's been an expansiveness in access to rights for migrants to Europe since the Second World War. So European policies across Europe, speaking broadly, since the Second World War, have become more open and more expansive. But what they have also become in the last 20 years is much more selective. And I think this is a key dynamic in Europe, selectivity. And what is the basis for selection? Well, essentially, those forms of migration defined as unwanted, by which I mean asylum seekers, refugees, and irregular migrants, and by which I also mean migrants from low-income countries, are excluded. So European countries' general trends towards openness and expansiveness have also encountered a greater focus on selectivity, particularly regarding asylum seekers, refugees, and irregular migrants. Those patterns are not uniform, so the response to Ukrainian displacement and the way European countries responded incredibly rapidly to Ukrainian displacement is very interesting in terms of the protections are offered which weren't offered to other refugee groups. Obviously very conscious of the response of Germany to Syrian refugees, so the patterns are not uniform. But I think selectivity is an important trend. If we look at attitudes to migration in Europe, and again, we spend a lot of time working on this and looking at high quality data over the last 20 to 30 years, attitudes to migration in Europe have become more favourable, not less favourable. It's wrong to imagine there's a tidal wave of anti-immigration sentiment sweeping across Europe. It's not borne out by the evidence. Attitudes toward migration are actually relatively stable and over time have become more favourable. I'm not saying then that there's some kind of tidal wave of pro-migration sentiment. It's kind of glass half full, half empty. But what changes, and it's really significant, is issue salience, the level of public attention to the issue, which can activate those sections of the population which are concerned about the issue. I think that explains a lot of the political changes we see in Europe, driven by issue salience and activation of sections of the population, sections of the electorate. And that's, again, a very highly significant trend in Europe. So, and then the final point I wanted to make is, well, how do you build consensus for migration policy? Well, I think in Europe, one of the key things is, amongst many European citizens who have what could be called a more conservative value orientation, conservative with a small c, is a system that is seen to work. I think the current media focus on boat arrivals across the Mediterranean gives the impression that the European migration system is in chaos. That undermines public confidence in migration policy. So that it's not that people necessarily opposed to migration or hostile to migrants. They'd rather see a policy that was seen as functioning, that was more there was more certainty in the operation of politics. We could understand that there were rules that are being followed. So I just wanted to put those thoughts on migration policy and politics in to follow up on some of the very interesting points that Joyce made. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you. I would like to ask the German ambassador. We've heard recently the German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier that the number of migrants coming to the country had boosted to a breaking point. How could EU countries deal with irregular migration and at the same time facilitate illegal migration? And I would also like to know if there is cooperation between Germany and Cyprus on this issue, the migration issue.
Well, and thank you very much for the invitation and the interest on a Friday afternoon. You were talking about my predecessor about attitudes, and maybe I start with this attitudes. Yesterday, from the Conservative Party, Friedrich Merz, who is also possibly a candidate for the Chancellor, made a remark saying that asylum seekers in Germany, and Germany experiences an influx, of course, of migrants, go for medical treatment, and by that they take the appointment that German people don't get anymore at the dentist. This remark really sparked a debate exactly on the question attitudes and how do we deal with the situation and with the increasing number of or perceived increasing numbers of migrants, legal and illegal, coming to Germany. I'm struck with two remarks that our president made with regards to migration. And one is, well, migration is not going to go away, but we have to find ways and means how to deal with the situation. And another quote would be in German, for those who understand it, das Herz ist groß, die Mittel sind endlich. Which, if I wanted to translate it, it means our hearts are big, but our pockets, our money is limited. This, as words of introduction to outline that what Germany is trying to do is a paradigm shift. Paradigm shift means we want to make a clear or more clear distinction with we want, and that was mentioned also in the World Bank report, we want and we need, as a country of destination, more skilled workers, and we are in desperate need of skilled workers. So how do we do that? And I'm coming to that. And the other question being, how do we deal with irregular migration, apart from return or readmission, whatever you call it. So this paradigm shift is what we are working on, and where us, the embassies, have been asked. I just went to the ambassadors conference beginning of September in Berlin to help also in the embassies with this paradigm shift. What does it mean? I said we are in urgent need of skilled laborers, and this is, yes, it is the nurses from the Philippines, it is people in the construction sector, but mainly what we are looking for is IT specialists. We have been trying to attract IT specialists from India. I think we were not really successful. Why were we not successful? I mean, IT specialists from India, possibly, they, first of all, of course, it's a language, right? I mean, who goes and learns German or goes to a country which is cold and doesn't have a reputation of being a country of immigration? I mean, possibly, yes, I'm not surprised that IT specialists rather go for Silicon Valley in the US than to Germany. So the government and legislation, we are trying to address this challenge, and we have passed some laws. I mean, we are good in passing laws and changing criteria. And but these, I think, it is a paradigm shift. It's a mindset shift. So we have lowered in our proposals. We have lowered the prerequisites to come as skilled laborers to Germany, mainly by lowering the level of language knowledge. Also, the question of recognition of diploma. It's a nightmare in Germany. Recognition of diploma, it's a bureaucratic monstrum. All the offices and agencies involved. So we are trying to streamlining that. And we have launched a campaign, Welcome to Germany, to make information more accessible. And what we are noticing, it's the message is being spread, and people know about the requirements that have been lowered, and the more ease to come to Germany. Also, of course, with family members, which is an important aspect, that also the families members can come and take residence in Germany. And we have put up some pilot projects with some countries of origin, where we want to implement this paradigm shift of, yes, those who may not stay or are here not meant to stay have to return, but at the same time attracting, offering conditions for skilled people. I'm looking at the countries we are talking about. You will not be surprised. It's Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, Ghana, Nigeria, Pakistan, and Iraq. And there's 2 new ones which will be established in Jordan and in Indonesia. So that is the paradigm shift that we are working on to attract skilled laborers, skilled migrants, legal migration to Germany. The other point I wanted to make is cooperation between Germany and Cyprus. And I think Salina is going also to speak more on, of course, European policy and the Migration and Asylum Pact and the question of distribution and solidarity. So for me, what would be important to stress is that within the European Union, we feel that solidarity between the EU member states is very, very important. It is, of course, difficult. And that is why France and Germany and some other countries, they put up a voluntary solidarity mechanism, whereby we said, well, countries of first arrival, like Cyprus, need to be supported. So we volunteered to take asylum seekers to Germany, who will follow their procedures in Germany. And I'm happy to say that within 1 year, we took about 800 or 900 asylum seekers from Cyprus to Germany to show this solidarity with a small member country, and France doing the same. So we started building contacts, working on joint returns and readmissions, but this solidarity mechanism, I think it serves as a model for what, of course, for good reason, Cyprus is asking within the European Union. It is one of the key demands a mandatory solidarity mechanisms whereby all EU member states have to share the burden and find a way to help assist the countries of first origin with the big number of migrants.
Thank you very much.
I was at the end, indeed.
Sorry, did you conclude?
Thank you very much.
Okay. I mean, solidarity is a big issue, and this is the main issue that has been discussed as long as migration, especially since 2015. The first reception countries have been requesting a solidarity mechanism. And moving on to France, migration has been a very difficult topic in the French political debate for decades, and it's becoming more and more a hot topic. But France has recognized that cooperation with other EU countries will be key to managing migration. So, Mrs. Ambassador, I would like to ask you, similar to Germany, I would like to hear from you on how France and Cyprus have been cooperating on this front and how solidarity could work in Europe.
Thank you, Kalispera. First, let me thank the organizers of the Cyprus Forum for inviting me this afternoon alongside this distinguished panel to talk about a very difficult issue. It's never easy to talk about migration, of course. You mentioned the fact that it's a hot issue or contentious issue in France. Where is it not? I would say it's a difficult issue for France, for Cyprus, for most of the European countries and beyond. Why? Because the way our modern countries and our democracies are going to deal with this issue is probably one of the most difficult and sensitive issues that we have to deal with nowadays. We all know that in each country there are some extremist, some populist, nationalistic trends of our political system which are trying to exploit this issue in order to stir fears among populations and to try to gain votes. So we are not immune from this perspective. But we need to deal with this issue in a proper manner and a calm manner in order to try to avoid any passionate or discussions. First of all, I would like to recall that historically France has been one of the first country of destination for candidates to a better life. In the 19th century, France became one of the prominent destination for people coming from all over Europe, but also beyond. During just after the Second World War, also we had huge waves of migration following the independence of. I know it's a sensitive topic, but from former French colonies. So we have had a lot of waves of migration at that time. And those migrations were largely contributing to make up for our labor shortages, that's for sure. We had a lot of migrants in the mining sector, construction sector, iron, steel industries. Of course, now our needs have evolved, so we are trying to attract also, as Anke said, other kind of skilled workers or unskilled workers, but that could make up for our labor shortages. And just to give you an example of our last incentive scheme, if I can say that, for this selective migration that you mentioned also, is that we have put in place what we call a talent passport scheme. And the point of this scheme is to grant a 4-year residence permit to different people coming from IT, but also artists, and so it's not a kind of effort to drain some talents from abroad, but more to attract some talents, to exchange, and in order for them later to return to their countries. I don't want to elaborate too much on this issue of legal immigration, because we are going to enter soon into a very probably a hot debate, as you mentioned. We are going to reform our entire system of migration in order to promote legal migration, but also to fight against illegal migration. So I don't want to prejudge the outcome of this very political discussion that's going to take place in between our government, our parliament, and all the different segments of our society. I would like to focus a little bit more on illegal immigration and the way that the European Union was trying to face this issue, because I think that this is one of the hottest issues that we are faced with. In 2015, Europe faced a huge migratory crisis, and this crisis demonstrated the flaws of our asylum procedures, and also a certain lack, we have to acknowledge that, a certain lack of solidarity between member states. And today, our continent faces new waves of intense migration, and everybody is fully aware of the fact that it cannot be tackled at the national scale, of course, and it needs, as far as the European continent is concerned, it needs to be tackled, addressed at the European level, because we have gained a lot with free movement within the European Union, but it also commits us to managing the challenges of our common external border together. There is a need to combine the control of our border, the enforcement of our rules, but also the respect due to individuals who very often risk their lives, and we have seen that recently in the Mediterranean with all those dramas occurring in the Mediterranean. And we need to cooperate more with third countries. This is what we call the external aspect dimension of the European Union. A few years ago, we were completely blocked on the issue of the famous Pact on Migration and Asylum. We are blocked because, of course, the different member states have different interests, different situations. Some of them are country of first entry, some of them are a country of final destination, and some other countries are transit countries. So we needed to find a way to break the deadlock. And during the French presidency of the European Union, the first semester of 2022, we decided to try to approach this issue by what we call a gradual approch. And so we were discussing different, there is a whole package of regulations. I don't want to bother you too much with all those administrative aspects, but we managed to have a breakthrough on two important regulations. And it reopened the dialogue between member states. And so now, since June 2022, we have adopted those two major regulations about filtering and another one called Eurodac. But most of all, 21 member states and associated countries, they adopted a declaration on what Anke mentioned, voluntary mechanism of solidarity. Of course, some countries like Cyprus would have preferred a compulsory mechanism of solidarity, but it was a compromise, of course, and at the European level, we need to reach compromise. So it's a first step into the right direction. And so the idea was to help the country of first entry. More recently, this year, we have reached another agreement on two more regulations, and we have a bunch of other texts to finalize in order to really finalize this package, the Pact on Migration and Asylum. And we are confident, and France hopes, that we'll be able to do it before the next European elections, because the closer we get to the next European elections, of course, the more political and the more sensitive these issues are going to become. So we have made some steps forward. It's not perfect, but I think we consider that our European Union now is better armed and better equipped in order to tackle, to face this issue. The next step, and our countries have already started to work on this issue, is to work with countries of origin in order to strike deals and to to find agreements in order to help them to do more, to try to keep their citizens, but we need to help them to keep their citizens. So we are going to work on very intensively on this aspect in the coming months. It's a test for our unity, for the stability of our economies and our societies, but it's also a test for our values. So it needs to be tackled properly. I will conclude by a few words about what we are trying to do, like Germany, in cooperation with the Republic of Cyprus. So we are well aware, fully aware of the seriousness of the situation, critical situation that exists on the island. The French Minister of Interior, Gérald Darmanin, came in Cyprus in November 2021, and this visit helped us to led to two important measures coming from us. We sent some police officers within the Frontex framework in order to help the immigration services of Cyprus to deal with this illegal immigration. But we also decided to relocate hundreds of asylum seekers to France. So we started, like Germany, we started almost at the same time. And so hundreds of asylum seekers here present in Cyprus will go to France. And I can tell you that Cyprus is the first, it's the program in absolute number and in proportionate numbers for this voluntary solidarity mechanism. There are more asylum seekers relocated from Cyprus to France than from any other country. So we found it quite important in order to show our partners, our Cypriot partners, that we are ready to share the burden. And those are concrete measures. They are not only words, they are concrete measures. One last point, and I will be done. I think the word integration is really important, because once an asylum seeker is given any kind of protection or the refugee status, we need to work and to use and to resort to all the tools available in order to try to integrate them into our economic market, labor market, societies, education system. This is not easy. This is far from being easy, and France is probably one of the countries that know that very well. But we need to do that, because the coherence and of our society is at stake on this issue. And what happened in Cyprus recently also shows that it's very important not to overlook this need for integration policy. Thank you. I was very long.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. I would like you to be brief, because we have 15 minutes left for this panel discussion, and I will move quickly to Mrs. Valianatou from Chatham House. I know that your research focuses on the political dynamics between the various levels of EU asylum governance, and I would like to hear your thoughts on the securitization of migration and how it has been linked to the recent political and policy developments, both the EU and national level.
Thank you, Nektaria. Thank you, everyone who attends this very important yet difficult discussion, as the other panels mentioned. Actually, I think it's very timely I speak after the ambassadors, because I will also talk about forced migration at EU level, that's painted from a different angle, or paint a different picture. So, as Joyce mentioned, migration is a complex but very regular phenomenon, because both migrants and refugees can bring also great prosperity and opportunities for development in their host countries. A diverse society is a richer society in cultural, political, and economic terms. So why migration isn't framed in such positive terms in the political discourse? Unfortunately, migration has been one of the most highly politicized and divisive topics across the world, and definitely in the European Union. Since 2016, following the arrivals of large numbers of refugees, from the Middle East particularly, European governments have not been able to reach an agreement, to agree on sharing responsibilities. As a result of this political inability to reach consensus, the Union and its member states have increasingly tried to prevent asylum seekers from arriving, often by using illegal methods, such as the so-called pushbacks performed by the Greek Coast Guard, or by engaging in questionable partnerships with third countries aiming to control migration in exchange of financial and other benefits. Turkey, Libya, and more recently Tunisia are examples of this European trend of collaborating with authoritarian regimes in order to keep migrants out, whatever the costs, in terms of human rights, foreign policy, or rule of law. And if this hostile stance towards migrants and refugees was once part of the far-right populist agenda, it's been gradually normalized and adopted even by center-right governments and politicians. You may have seen the recent news on Lampedusa, the Italian island which recently received thousands of asylum seekers fleeing North Africa. The President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, visited Lampedusa and pledged her support to the Italian far-right Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. Meloni, like other European leaders, is calling for a war on smuggling and clearly presents irregular migration as one of the biggest security threats that Europe is currently facing, alongside climate change and terrorism. Similarly, the European Commission has praised Greece's, Poland's, and other EU countries' efforts to push migrants away from their borders, labeling them as hybrid threats, in the sense that human beings are being used or are instrumentalized, to use their language, by neighboring countries in order to put political pressure on Europe. So this increasing framing of refugees and migrants as security threats is what experts call the securitization of migration, which in turn justifies the hardening of border controls and other restrictive practices that take place in the name of security, like the detention of asylum seekers contrary to international and European refugee law. So this securitization trend creates a vicious circle of failed policies, such as fueling the smuggling industry because exactly of the tightening in border controls. And it also goes hand in hand with other trends, including the effort to externalize migration control to non-European countries, which I mentioned earlier. A strategy that has proven to backfire and being used by these countries for geopolitical blackmailing against the EU. So European states, instead of cooperating internally, improving their asylum capacity, as well as addressing smuggling by opening legal channels and reducing demand for irregular travels, which, by the way, is what they did in the case of Ukrainian refugees and worked wonderfully, they keep focusing on preventing African and Middle Eastern refugees from arriving, even by cooperating with the liberal regimes. This not only violates human rights and Europe's international legal obligations, but it also weakens the rule of law within the Union and its credibility as a leader in multilateral fora on human rights and democracy. And very importantly, as the other panelists explained before, aging Europe is missing out on these tremendous opportunities for growth brought about by migration. European leaders should leave aside any short-term political gains and make sure their actions match their words. The EU fundamental values, including respect for human rights, should also apply to people seeking safety at EU borders, irrespective of their race, ethnicity, or religion. This goes back to the selectivity point that Professor Geddes made. As Pope Francis recently said in one of his speeches in France, migration is a reality of our times, a natural process involving 3 continents around the Mediterranean, and it needs to be governed with wisdom, foresight, and European responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Now moving on to Mrs. Drousiotou. I would like to ask about the Cyprus Refugee Council, which we know that tries to support and advocate for the rights of vulnerable groups in Cyprus and promote their integration, the big issue that we were discussing before. So how do you think refugees can be empowered and supported for this, to achieve integration? and how can we ensure the genuine representation of their voices?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for the other panelists' points, and I hope I can connect them to the Cyprus context as we work on a daily basis directly with refugees in the country. So very interested in the report presented by Joyce. Hearing the word management a lot, and it's something that we have maintained, that there's definitely space in the Cyprus context for a much better management of these issues, and a lot of potential out there, especially keeping in mind that we are a country with extremely high needs for labor, for workforce, from low skill, but right up to high skill, which is something that I think many of us in Cyprus have not realized. So how do we empower and support refugees? Definitely we have to start by ensuring a dignified standard of living. And I think the events in the last couple of months in the country have shown that without effective management, without strategic planning, without creating the conditions for people to be able to live dignified and integrate, the pressures on the host community and the refugees themselves lead to the consequences that we've seen. We definitely need to facilitate employment. So from Monday, we're taking a step back, whereas asylum seekers were accessing the labor market within 1 month. From Monday, we go to 9 months. So we have employers calling us on a daily basis in dire, desperate need for staff. Integration. It's the most ignored chapter in Cyprus. We have not we don't have a plan, we don't have a strategy, and there's just very few initiatives here and there, which definitely is not enough. So vocational trainings, fast-track language courses, connecting to the needs that we have, again, going back to the workforce, and finding ways to utilize the people that are already in the country, educating them, training them, and making them those skills, giving them those skills that we desperately need. That brings to another important point, which is actually granting international protection in a timely manner. So there's a lot in the media about fast-tracking, of moving the asylum procedures quickly, which is something that we welcome and something that UNHCR has advocated as well as us for many, many years. But there's a lot of focus on the cases that will be rejected and removed, which is understandable, but we also need to focus on the people that will remain in the country. We have a population growing up here of Syrian nationals, young people that have been educated here, have gone to our public schools, speak the language, and they have not been used in the ways that they could be. As for participation of refugees, again, an area that we have taken close to 0 steps. Refugees, we talk about refugees and mostly in the absence of refugees. And I think we're so behind in this area that the only way that we could step it up is with effective measures, giving resources. There's a lot of talent out there, and assisting them to have a voice of their own. This is further inhibited that many of these young people I mentioned who grew up in this country will never get citizenship. So we are very limited to who we give citizenship, as well as long-term residence statuses, which would allow a further movement to EU member states. It's an EU status, and I personally cannot understand why we're not moving in that way. Coming to the rhetoric, we have seen again the consequences of hostile rhetoric, of negative rhetoric, and how it's affected the public discourse, how it has affected the communities. And we've seen that it leads to no good for anyone, not for refugees or migrants, not for the society, not for the communities itself. We need to take some definite action on that. The state, collaborating with other stakeholders to address fake news, to address the fear-mongering, and to take decisive steps to address hate speech and hate crime. But I want to end it on a positive. I do believe that Cyprus, it is a challenging issue. We do have high numbers, but our size does also enable a more effective management, and there are ways that we can deal with this in a much, much better way than in recent years. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for POLITICO. And now our final panelist, from UNHCR, Ms. Saha. We've heard from Joyce's presentation that the refugee crisis needs to be addressed as a development challenge. I'd like to ask you if this is in line with UNHCR's approach, and also how can we ensure that we have efficient asylum procedures? It's a big issue in accordance with EU laws, both in Cyprus and generally in Europe.
Thank you, and thank you for the organizers for the invitation. So we move back from the local to the global level, and maybe if I may start with UNHCR's estimation on the figures. We believe that by the end of 23 this year, the overall displacement figure will be as high as 17.2 million, and this including over 35 million refugees. Now, of course, beyond personal persecution, persons are displaced also due to conflict, violence, and other types of human rights violations. But in any case, these numbers are absolutely staggering, and we already heard from our colleague from World Bank that the low-income countries really continue to host a completely disproportionate share of the world's displaced people. In Cyprus today, we have some 32,500 asylum seekers and 16,900 refugees and subsidiary protection holders. Now, humanitarian assistance that UNHCR and many others deliver at the onset of conflicts and large displacements, it really aims at saving lives and alleviate suffering in a manner that respects and also restores personal dignity. However, humanitarian assistance is short-lived. In isolation, it may even place strain on local resources, affecting community dynamics and resulting ultimately in the marginalization of displaced people. So development, however, can address both the root causes and the consequences of migration and forced displacement. So development strategies that take account of the economic implications of population movements, including the enormous potential that they have, are essential. Protection needs of refugees are often very protracted. They last for years, decades, and therefore humanitarian action needs absolutely to be coupled with development for both refugees, but also for the host communities. World Bank is a key partner of UNHCR, and both organizations a few months back signed a global framework for data sharing. And this agreement will facilitate timely access to data related to the socio-economic condition of the people that we serve, enabling the World Bank on their behalf to design targeted programs that build long-term economic resilience and individual potential. And on the other hand, it enables UNHCR to access World Bank's country data, and hence it will also inform our programming and assistance delivery. I wanted to say a few words about the Global Compact of Refugees. It was adopted almost 5 years ago by the United Nations General Assembly, and it is a framework for more predictable and equitable responsibility sharing at the global level. And it recognizes that the sustainable solution for refugee situations cannot be achieved without renewed international cooperation. Now this December, in a few months, we will organize the second Global Refugee Forum. and it will bring together a second time the international community to discuss on the progress that have been made during the past 4 years, and also to make new pledges for the future. Now, these pledges are commitments that different actors, including private sector, academia and businesses, can make, and that will achieve tangible benefits for refugees and host communities. But to expand solutions for refugees beyond already existing resettlement programs, the UNHCR also advocates for complementary migration pathways, such as family reunification, private or community sponsorship programs, labor mobility, and third country scholarships. However, it's important to remember that these complementary pathways can never substitute states' obligations to provide international protection to refugees through access to asylum. And this brings us to the challenge that we're currently facing in preserving the asylum space. Negative attitudes often create assumptions that asylum seekers are in fact economic migrants who are seeking for better opportunities in richer countries, thus threatening jobs and livelihoods. As a result, we have seen very restrictive asylum policies and measures imposed by governments in the recent years, including restricting access to asylum procedures. But however, all asylum seekers, regardless of how they arrive or from where they arrive, should have access to effective asylum procedures, which should include a very early triaging of cases to identify and expedite those that are well-founded. Creation of a welcoming society without discrimination, xenophobia and racism, it is the first step towards integration. And without understanding that refugees are a resource when integrated, rather than considering them a long-term burden, any integration programs are likely to fail. And I wanted to point out to the negative attitudes that we have observed lately in Cyprus. We commissioned an opinion poll 4 years ago and now recently a few months ago, and we can see the very drastic change. Currently, the Cypriots do believe that refugees should be isolated from the communities and should not be given opportunities to integrate. What we could observe is almost like a moral disengagement strategy, that it is easier when we believe that in fact refugees do not want to integrate, so we do not feel obliged to provide them with opportunities. And we have been extremely concerned about this trend. So, as Corina already referred to the recent tensions that then really turned into violence against asylum seekers and refugees, it really put in evidence this urgent need to move beyond the provision of very basic humanitarian assistance and to enhance reception capacity in the communities, not in the camps, and to provide equal access to social assistance schemes and to allow for self-reliance and providing timely and full access to the labor market that we are now witnessing this very negative policy that will start as of next week, where asylum seekers will be rather restricted from accessing the labor market for the first 9 months after their arrival.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, our time is up. I hope this hybrid presentation was not too annoying both for the audience and for the speakers. And please join me in thanking our excellent speakers. Thank you very much.